Yeah, you guys are talking about like physical media and sort of like how it plays with the home. A home is like a place to invite people into and get conversations going and get people excited about your space. And you can't do that with hyper minimalism because everything is, sotto voce or under the floor or in some cupboard somewhere, and it just lacks personality.
And gosh, there's so many books. They're literally aligning the top. Wow.
Yeah, we're sitting in our library/dining room.
Yeah.
Are you a comic book collector at all? Do you have any
Very minimally. So I actually read far fewer comics than I think most people who make comics.
Right. Yeah.
I am a big believer in if you're going to work in a medium, you should pull inspiration from other mediums to enrich that medium rather than just repeat what has been done before.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I feel like we had that conversation one of the other times we met that don't read as many. I just remember it now. You don't read as you said, you don't read as many comics as other writers and drawers of comics would. And I mean, on some level, it's because you think a lot of it is bad too, like a lot of modern comics. Not to make you go after anyone in particular. I believe you said something to that effect that a lot of it's not worth it.
Yeah, and that's not about a specific creator or any kind of creator. What it is that comics as a medium come from the trash stratum.
Yeah.
It's inherently a low medium. So the bar to entry is fairly low for writing, illustration, etc., which is fine, and that's good. But when you can do something with a low medium and make it special, that really stands out. So it's not about it so much as about like everything is terrible and I hate the medium. It's that to find inspiration, those diamonds in the roughs within that medium is particularly inspirational.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And in particular, I found inspirational about Double Ot Kid, like the first page. How there's like a circle in the middle, and then like although I don't really like comics and stuff, but I thought your layout was very like outstanding.
Oh, thank you.
It was very like it jumped out to me very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's a good example.
I'm learning
work.
on the job. I'm getting better at layouts and stuff like that.
I saw this film called recently. It's called I think Funny Pages, and it was literally about, and it was shot in this style of Uncut Gems. Takes place in the Northeast, and it was about how this kid meets this one guy, and he wants to be a comic book artist himself, and he meets this one guy who did like the outlines or whatever of a particular comic book.
Okay.
And the kid was like, "Oh, you did such a good job." And the guy was like, "I don't know, I just do the outlines of this comic book."
Sure,
and he's like, "Why do you give a shit about who I am? Like, all I did was like the fucking lines." Have you ever met anyone like that when doing your comic book work? Where it's like, this is one guy just does the borders.
Sure. Well, in sort of like the big two in Marvel and DC, or in like corporate comic book world, labor is subdivided across all the arenas. So there's a writer, there's a penciler. Sometimes they call it an inker or a finisher. There would be a colorist or a team of colorists. And given the technology of the day, those jobs all mean different things. But yeah, that subdivision of labor happens in a sort of like larger publishing setting for comic books. Or you could call yourself a cartoonist, which is someone who just does it all and produces a book. And that's more what I do.
I see. Interesting.
And on Wishbone, for example, I'm trying to remember correctly, someone else did the color.
No, I did it all.
Wow, yeah. Do you think you'd ever want to do this subdivision of work? Like,
it's possible. I could see passing color off to someone else. I could see collaborating with a writer, perhaps working in that way. But I think I come from a background of contemporary art. I was sort of failed contemporary artist for like 20 years, and there's a monomania in making everything yourself that I think translates easily to the comics medium. So I would probably try to do as much as I could, barring some extenuating circumstance, tight deadline, etc.
Yeah, I mean, in the corporate world, presumably that division of labor is primarily just because it's a much more streamlined, factory line of making work, right? It's not,
Also because it's on a monthly schedule. I put out comics as I put them out.
As you put them out. Right,
yeah.
right.
There's no ongoing series, not yet. There's no deadline. I can take my time. So I have the luxury of being able to sort of do it all.
Yeah. Is the kind of verbiage like, oh, this is a inker, this is a, writer, is that considered important? Like you would say, like, I am a cartoonist because I do all of it?
There's a hard distinction.
There is a hard distinction.
Yeah.
So you would call yourself a cartoonist?
I would call myself a cartoonist.
Yes.
I work professionally as a commercial illustrator for apparel. And in my spare time, my own sort of like creative endeavors, I consider myself a cartoonist.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, to back up a step, we met, all three of us actually met at Chris Gabriel's meme analysis event back in April. And I think I was introduced to you as a, as I don't know if the word cartoonist was used. I mean, people outside the industry may not have the proper verbiage to use, but you probably described as a comic book illustrator or something. But I know you've worked with Chris on the Wishbone comic you brought up was for Aeonic Comics.
Correct. Issue number 2.
Issue number 2. I don't think Aeonic Comics is currently active, but I know it's been a product of Chris's.
I think it was a short-lived thing. I think they did 3 issues total, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, happy to be involved.
But yeah, very, very cool. Anyhow, we met there. So I knew that you did comics, and then we followed each other online, and I eventually, realized you were publishing How Did We Get Here, which is your most recent, what would you call it, a graphic novel? A little short to be a graphic novel, right? But,
well, first of all, it's not my most recent.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. I would just call it a comic book.
Yeah.
Graphic novel denotes like long form, sometimes square bound, etc.
Yeah.
This is like your classic comic book. It's 32 pages, a quick in and out. You could read it in 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
No. Single issue, all self-contained.
No, very good. I definitely want to talk a lot about How Did We Get Here.
Cool.
I mean, maybe we'll call this episode that. Like, we'll definitely
sounds great.
Tackle it because I think just both in terms of as artistic work, but also like intellectually, lots of stuff we can get into. But keep the intro going, keep it intro mode. I mean, so I knew you did that, and then as we agreed we do a podcast. As I delved more, I realized you have this background in fine arts and various kinds of illustration and design.
All the above.
Yeah. Just go on intro mode a little bit. I have these notes, so I'll read them. Your work has been exhibited across America, as well as the UK, Denmark, and Greece. You kind of have that international recognition. It's very cool. I really enjoyed a lot of this various interviews and features I found on you online. Juxtapose magazine has called you a man with an authoritative understanding of fringe cultural mythologies. Anyway, just gassing you up a bit, but there is that level of seriousness, I guess, to your work, and that level of through lines of theme and in design, and it was cool to delve into.
And you've done, if I'm not mistaken, the illustration for ZZ Top and Pantera?
Well, I've done a lot of bands, usually through licensing companies or through merchandising firms.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of large name bands, a lot of tour merchandise. Work with a lot of Western wear, apparel brands, stuff like that.
Yeah,
lots
like
of t-shirts.
Yeah. I really on your Instagram, a lot of that is showcased. I really enjoy. Like I think when I first saw, I was like, "Oh, these are speculative." I was like, "No, these are real." Like Sterling actually works with these people, and it's good stuff. One of the things that really jumped out to me is your work with Modest Mouse on the Lonesome Crowded West 25th anniversary shirt, and the reason for that is. I don't own many band t-shirts, but one that I do own is the traditional version of that t-shirt, the Buffalo. I worked the local crew for a Modest Mouse concert in college, and it was given to me for free. So
cool.
I'm not a big buyer of band shirts for whatever reason, but I have that one, and I was like, oh, wow, he did the updated version. But it's also just like a really good example of your work. I feel
it's pretty indicative.
Yeah, a lot of Western wear, as you said, which ties into the Modest Mouse, Lonesome Crowded West thing.
There's a ghost back there.
Cat.
Oh,
cat. How did the Western aesthetic? Is that just kind of the work you've been drawn to, gravitated towards?
Well, illustration-wise, I've been really lucky to be able to do a couple different things, which means garnering different types of work, which is great. But I've always been a fan of country music. From Texas. Very natural progression.
Evan's also from Texas.
Oh, right.
So
Austin.
Born in Dumas, raised in San Angelo.
Right.
Is that like the upper part?
Dumas is in the Panhandle.
I think I read
very,
that right.
Very north.
I don't know my Texas geography super well, but that's
no
cool.
one does. It's all right.
Yeah.
It's too big. But yeah, it's a natural thing for me, and I'm just like inspired by like sort of 60s, 70s country music aesthetic, and I've been lucky enough to work in that arena in apparel.
Definitely, and a lot of your stuff kind of has the aesthetic of like 70s bootleg t-shirt. No, I don't know if you call them bootleg t-shirts, but like fan-made t-shirts.
All the above. I do specialize in a very like crusty, lot-born, really beat up, poorly screen-printed kind of aesthetic that you would have found in, I don't know, Waylon Jennings, sold out of the back of a Firebird in '78 or whatever.
Yeah,
that's kind of the idea.
Yeah. Chris Stapleton is somebody you've worked with.
Yeah, worked a lot with Chris Stapleton.
Name drop, but I saw that on Instagram. I wanted to talk a little bit because obviously that makes sense. The Western aesthetic being from Texas. In some of the other features I've read on you and interviews I've read with you, you talk quite a bit about how, and you've already addressed it here, but how being from Texas sort of influences your aesthetic, but how. California is also West, right? It's such a. I've been thinking about this recently for whatever reason. The California and Texas are viewed as like, because one is like the big red state and the other is the big blue state. They're viewed as like these opposing forces. But I often think like on like a street level, there's definite similarities between California and Texas too.
Sure. I mean, even going back to country music, like there was like the Bakersfield sound.
Yeah.
It was the Nashville of the West for a moment.
Right.
And
yeah.
So culturally, there's a lot of like ranches. You'd get outside the large city centers, and there's a lot of ranch land, and outside of vineyards and stuff. So it's not terribly different to certain parts in Texas, even geographically.
Yeah, I just drove up through the Central Valley, and it's like I've only been to Texas a little bit, but the desert too, of course. I've been to West Texas, and it's like. Yeah, it's just not so different. I feel like the people are not... I mean, of course the people are different. There's very distinctive Texas things, very distinctive California things, but I gotta say, I don't know. There's more in common there than meets the eye. I'm speaking as a non-Texan and not a native Californian either.
I largely agree with you.
Yeah. And you've been in LA for how long?
I've been in LA since 2006, so this is home at this point.
I like it here too. Like, I concur about like there's like a kind of Texas vibe, and people here are actually pretty nice. I mean, the LA... like the critique of how people exists, but it's not as prevalent.
It's also not everywhere. It's a giant city.
Yeah.
I mean, I have nothing to do in my day-to-day life with the entertainment industry. I think a lot of these kind of ideas and cliches about a type of person in Los Angeles comes from that milieu.
Definitely. Evan and I both can't say the same on a day-to-day basis. But I think
not to disparage. I'm just saying that's where those ideas come from.
There's lots of great people in the human industry, but I think that pretty much all the negative California stereotypes also come from that. So.
Yeah, we're a company town, and I'm just not part of that company.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Have you been to the Philosophical Research Society?
Yeah, recently, as a matter of fact.
Oh, for an event? Or?
Yeah, I saw the... I don't know if it was a premiere, but I saw a showing of an M.C. Escher documentary.
Oh, cool.
In their theater, which was cool. And then the time I had been before that, I went to an alchemical tincture kind of display where these two women kind of showed you how like alchemy and perfume were sort of intrinsically linked, and like the distillation of oils and such. Yeah, the place is great.
Nice.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so you've been into esotericism and such for a while?
I would say I have a lay person's passing interest in these ideas, and I'm not afraid of these ideas, and the occult, and like we have a sort of spooky section in our library over here, is an interest to both Julia and I, but nothing more than like a sort of like passing lay person's interest, I don't think.
Gotcha, yeah. No, it seems to have some influence, but more.
I mean, it's in there. I mean, in the comics, I talk about high strangeness and like various like extra human entities and stuff like that. It's certainly seeped into the work on some level.
The Kali Yuga as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a specific comic.
How would you describe the Kali Yuga? Like, could you describe it to me? Like what it is?
You mean the actual concept of the Kali Yuga?
Yes.
I forget the actual number, but something like 100,000 years of suffering. It's the age. It's the age of Kali, the Yuga of Kali, which is a cleansing, suffering, suffer-inducing force. Kali is also like the sort of like feminine chaotic force in that cosmology.
Yeah, which you capture pretty well in your very short but good
Yes,
comic
yeah.
about it.
Very much so.
Kali Yuga Law is the name of that comic, which is on my Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I like how, like Kali Yuga Law, like what's the one about the shark fin soup? Sorry, I'm forgetting the name.
The shark fin soup is called Best Served Cold.
Best Served Cold.
That was published with Apocalypse Confidential during their Summer of the Shark special.
Yeah. Love Apocalypse Confidential too. Give them a shout out. But I like how some of your shorter comics and some things you even just put in my notes. I have a few printed, like your Harry Crews.
Oh, sure.
And well back. You basically kind of make memes too, would you say? Almost. I mean, maybe they're not totally mimetic, but they have the same aesthetic. Yeah.
So what people probably don't realize, because I'm not really focused, social media is kind of exit only for me.
Yeah.
I put stuff up, walk away, chat a little bit in different group chats here and there, but like it's pretty exit only. So what people may not realize is that when I put up an image that is like a text macro or like a meme that looks like a comic panel, it is actually a comic panel from something that's coming up. So everything that you see functions on two levels. I put it out. I choose the ones to put out online that can function purely mimetically, and then once you get to see the next comic, that actually is plugged into the narrative. They're just panels plucked from the comic.
Yeah,
so my hope is that
they'll
be able to exist on two levels.
I see. Well, I don't mean to make you speak about work before it's published, but ones I pulled out include Wellbeck with the quote about not liking the world, and Harry Crews kind of saying something similarly surly about being an artist. Are these all from the same work?
Those are both from the same work.
Yeah, they have the same vibe.
So I'm so close to finishing this, I don't mind speaking about it. I am 99.9% finished with my next book. It will be called Self-Licking Ice Cream Cone. I'm self-publishing. It's a black and white 22-page comic that I am hoping to have published by Christmas.
Great.
And available for purchase for Christmas. The one that you're referencing is a short about various curmudgeonly inspirational figures.
Yeah,
some of these
out there, right?
they're out there. Many such cases.
Yes.
But it'll have 8 shorts, some only a page, some I think the longest one is 6 pages. It will be somewhat like How Did We Get Here, in that there are bits of cultural commentary put forth in a sort of like Adam Curtis-y sort of manner, but there are also sort of there's a crime fiction story, there's some like auto-fictive stuff that's in there.
Sweet. So
a little bit more expansive and a little bit more narrativized and story-driven.
Very cool. Yeah, no, that's kind of an interesting segue to try about. I'm gonna try and maybe it's an abstract question, but I'll try and make it as concrete as possible. Like the drive to make a comic book and the way that is both an art project but also a writing project. It's a kind of very. Adam Curtis is kind of an apt comparison because like it's somewhat similar to what he does with documentaries, where it's like he's going to delve into some pretty deep water sociological and intellectual topics, but it's done in a way that's really entertaining and has that cool sort of old school TV vibe, almost
Sure.
switching from like really good music to the visuals, which is similar with the comic book. That same sort of grounded in a fundamentally very entertaining. Again, you talked about earlier with the high-low thing of the medium, a very entertaining medium, but delving into deep intellectual waters. I guess, what am I trying to ask? You're a cartoonist, so it's what you do, but sort of how do these pieces, this is where the abstraction comes in, how do these pieces come together of like wanting to do art, but also wanting to express something deeper intellectually? Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine as an artist, it probably all comes together sort of organically and you know what you want to make, but curious if you could speak to that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's actually a really clear line for me. So, like I said, I pursued fine art, painting specifically. I was a sort of a figurative painter for roughly 20 years. I exhibited all over the place, tried to put myself in as many art fairs, as many galleries as I could. And in 2019, I essentially woke up to the fact that I had become a kind of pay pig I was an engine for small galleries to sell work, because my work did sell from time to time, operating on these large group shows that always gave some donation element to some NGO or nonprofit somewhere. And I realized that this model thrives off of these artists who do perhaps sell, but maybe don't have a giant name for themselves. You get 5 of those in a group show, you've made your nut for the month, and you can donate, which is a tax write-off, etc. But I was never going to graduate past that to solo shows of any renown or get into the next tier up of gallery spaces. Most of the gallery spaces I've shown in are in strip malls and are now donut shops. Or a hot chicken place or whatever, sneaker store, whatever it is. And so I effectively retired in 2019. I destroyed all of my remaining artwork. So anyone who owns a painting, its value just went up. Congratulations. There's no more. I got rid of all my art supplies. I divorced myself from... I was going to stop completely. And I began writing a book, which I thought was going to be an art book, and hoped to peddle on the art book circuit, of which there is a large one, and maybe try to sell it through galleries, etc. And I had the seed of what became How Did We Get Here? And I realized first that as an art book that would have failed, because I am railing against everything the art world is built on. It would have been dead in the water.
Right.
And then for no other reason... Well, actually, no, there is a reason. I began... for a number of reasons, I began looking back to comic books. I didn't want to take in visual media. I stopped going to museums. I stopped going to art shows. And I didn't want to take in visual medium that I associated with this kind of oppressive ideology that I had kind of unwittingly folded into simply by... giving them a quarter of my sales every time I would sell a painting, and so as an antidote to that, I just started buying up the old comic books that I read in the early '90s as a kid, and became very inspired. And one day realized that this art book could become a comic book instead. And I had never made a comic. I drew the characters from comics that I liked as a child. But the endeavor from a creative standpoint is really monumental. It's not quite like writing a novel. I'm not going to say they're tantamount, but the amount of work and man hours that it takes are incredible. So I'd never tried it. Finally, I kind of like woke up 8 months later and had this book, and shopped it to a dear friend of mine who's a publisher, and we released it in 2021.
That's the story of How Did We Get Here?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I totally didn't realize that it was from 2021. I thought it was newer for some reason.
Well, I am a shill, and I will always advertise it online. You could, be forgiven.
I think I took the advertisement as the... But also, I'll turn this into... Yeah, I think I took the advertisement I took the, you're posting about it as that it was new. But I will also say, I guess 2021 isn't that long ago, so it isn't that surprising, but it feels very of the moment.
Well, thank you.
It does.
It's kind of got a more... It feels like a very post-pandemic perspective rather than 2021, which was technically during the pandemic for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a weird long thing. I started writing the seeds of it in 2019. Yeah. I think I really, really wrote it in 2020, early 2020, so that tracks.
To do, right? Yeah.
And if it still has relevance, which I think many people have said
more
this.
So than ever.
Yeah, I think it has more relevance now. But if that's the case, I would attribute that to people just catching up with what I was so pissed off about in the middle of that year.
I think a lot of people have, which is the cool part. At the time, it was still sort of fringe to have some of these perspectives. Blurbing, giving yourself a little what's the word? When you have a quote at the beginning of a book, why is the word not
forward?
Coming? Not forward.
An epigraph?
Epigraph from Nick Land. These kinds of things. These kinds of things have become a little more, I think, common since 2021.
Sure. Yeah. At the beginning, the top of How Did We Get Here has an epigraph from Nick Land, from
Feng Numina, right?
Feng Numina, and then followed immediately by an epigraph of a Jose Canseco tweet.
Yeah.
That should give you the intellectual breadth of the book.
Remind me what the Jose Canseco tweet.
He says something like,
come back to me.
The truth is being constricted. I have the book. I'll find it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. We have a physical copy.
We live on a planet where the truth is dismissed and imprisoned on a consistent level. Truth, honesty, and honor is on the verge of extinction. Jose Canseco.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Good to have it. Yeah, it's always
so
good to
much
have
more
a physical
beautiful in real life.
Yeah, we did admittedly read a PDF. I will buy an actual copy.
Looks a little better than the PDF.
Yeah, for sure.
No, it looks.
I loved your extrapolations on the Strokes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was like,
I wanted to bring up the Strokes because I've talked to you about the Strokes, Evan, in the past. You were saying
one of our favorite authors, Mike Maub,
right,
idolizes the Strokes.
Yeah, you were saying. I don't know if you want me to say this. Well, yeah, I don't think you're going to have an issue with me saying it. You thought that was the most cringe aspect of Mike Maub was his love of Julian.
Oh yeah, because I was like, what the fuck? I was like, why do you give a shit? Yeah,
I like this. I'm guessing I like the Strokes more than anyone at this table, but I'm not a total Strokes stan either. Among other things I want to talk about this, I wanted to delve into the Strokes chapter. For me, it was, most of it I agreed with wholeheartedly. I don't disagree with the Strokes part, but I thought maybe could be some conversation. I mean, do you think the Strokes suck, or do you think what the Strokes represent sucks?
So this is great. I've yet to be able to talk about this with this book. I love the Strokes.
Okay.
It was a huge record for me. I'm 42, so I was 21.
Yeah, it's the
20 when this record came out. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I loved everything about this sort of like garage rock movement at the turn of the century. It scratched an itch that like punk couldn't any longer because it was dead and had sort of like filtered through culture into motocross and like soda commercials or whatever.
And they kind of like overly conceptual political punk rock, and garage rock brought the fun back.
It brought the fun back. So yeah, I was on board. That's not really the point. I can hold two ideas in my head at the same time.
Yeah, I kind of thought
I love the Strokes. I think they're a great band. That first 2-3 records or whatever, great. However, in this 2-page short, what I illustrate is that the Strokes and their ilk are responsible for us stopping thinking about the future. Because they came at a time when, history was over, man.
Yeah.
And so I say in the book, they're an amalgamation of Tom Petty, the Ramones, and the Replacements.
Yep.
We somehow couldn't put that together because they looked so cool and they were so sexy or whatever. I also illustrate at the same time that 9/11 happened concurrently with their rise, as well as the love of vintage culture, vintage clothing, vintage furnishings, etc.
Vote for Pedro's shirt here.
Yeah, Vote for Pedro's in there. I reference Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused.
Of course.
We started to look backward culturally, and the piece ends with me saying we've essentially traded flying cars for white grandpa belts. The white grandpa belt being the accessory du jour of garage rockers at the time, belt worn just askew, like so much.
And it's it's completely true in that's the future that was canceled was the future that Back to the Future envisioned.
Totally.
Like the film, and that's what we maybe could have had, as well as this is a sentiment echoed by one of the greatest thinkers, Mark Fisher, and his online writings.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely, this is probably the most Fisherian.
The slow cancellation of the
future, exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very like Mark Fisher. I owe him $1 for this one.
Big topic, but I mean, so this cancellation of the future that occurred, and that has kind of continued to occur, and it relates also to your piece about endless Hollywood remakes.
Sure.
Which is another great one. Huge topic here, but I mean, what do you think the driver on that is? There's like this. Is it sort of Freudian, or are we kind of infantilizing ourselves to like always wanting to go back to what made us happy when we were kids, or things we vaguely remember hearing on the radio? Like, do you have any ideas about the way out of this? What has become? Yeah, it started around the time of the Strokes, but it's become this. There's so much nostalgia on top of nostalgia that people are nostalgic now for the Strokes. If you're aware of the term, it's a silly term. What is it?
Is it like
indie sleaze.
Oh,
right.
There's no nostalgia for nostalgia, essentially. So it's kind of recursive and endless. And again, as you were saying, the Strokes, by no means is all of it bad. I like a lot of nostalgic
it's not the point.
stuff. Yeah. But it does feel like a trap almost. Like, do you have any thoughts? And it's okay if not, because it's a massive and difficult topic about how we can transcend this.
Well, because it's so massive, I can only look at it through my own lens and really only tackle a sliver of it. But you talk about like why this infantilization happens and why culture slows and why nostalgia takes hold instead of a sort of futurism. And I think, this was written largely in 2020. I think we can point to the state of exception that occurred during the pandemic and the attendant safetyism.
Yeah, definitely.
That has grown along with this backward-looking ideology. And I think there's something there that goes really hand in hand. Safetyism.
Yeah. And 9/11
I would
was
point
the first
yes.
huge dose of safetyism.
Absolutely.
We're 9/11's 4 days away? Or
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would mark the last 22 years, 23 years as a ramping up of safetyism concurrent with a ramping up of nostalgia and an inward sort of like view rather than an outward like sort of futurism.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's something that like our mutual friend, meme analysis, Chris Gabriel talks about. Sort of. I mean, maybe not in these terms, but just a concern with the future and how we can kind of get out of these, he's a Freudian, these kind of repeated behaviors, I guess. And I don't really have an answer. I think what you said is definitely a good diagnosis of the problem. But I guess if there's any answer, it's almost like the only way out is through or something like that, which kind of can be grim. Yeah. You talking earlier about Kali Yuga, 100,000 years of suffering. Okay, so only way out is through. I don't know.
And that's at the very end, it's like something really pertinent you brought up is like, should we accelerate or hit the brakes?
Oh yeah. Like, that is the end.
People do have that choice, I suppose, in their own lives. Although that's a very like quote unquote controversial thing to say about like accelerationism and who accelerates and such.
That is a sign that this was really written in 2020 as I dropped the accelerationism.
Because now people kind of know what accelerationism is to an extent.
It's reached a bit of a mass idea. But so the book ends with our supra-terrestrial visitor, be he a robot or whatever he is, sort of giving us an ultimatum saying that, should we accelerate, should we hit the brakes? It's up to you. If not, I will be back and I'll be armed with more than just conversation. So this again ties to the Kali Yuga, the sort of like age of struggle, that like things can get worse. And if, behaviors and sort of the grip of ideology isn't loosened, there could be darker times ahead. So that's what I'm trying to hint at, hopefully humorously.
Yeah. What's interesting, the protagonist, robot, alien, extraterrestrial being, be he what he may, maybe he's even some kind of supernatural being, who knows, has that sort of like, it's almost like a Nick Landian like idea. I'm not super well versed in Nick Land, but the esoteric dimension of that, like a visitor, either from space or perhaps from another dimension or a spiritual dimension, who can come to warn and cultivate, but who can also destroy it. You wouldn't read this and think of it being that esoteric per se, or certainly not religious. But it does kind of, whenever you're delving into that Nick Land techno, what's the word, like techno cyber.
It's like, I guess, cyberpunk
future
that he writes about.
Techno esoterica.
It's certainly that. I mean, at the time I was pretty fresh off reading like CCRU, Fang Numina, etc. There is like a hyper techno capital pessimism that runs through this book. But if there's something I tried to do with that, it was to remove it directly from the sort of William Gibson-esque techno pessimism and bring it into like a quasi spiritual dimension. There are two kind of giveaways in this book that's the case. One is the last page, which illustrates somewhat what this character is. It gives you like a statistics sheet on it. and I won't spoil that. And then another one is very early in the book. There's a passage where the character's name is Void. Void tells us that there have been entities in the past who have tried to sway humanity in one direction or another, but we never paid them all that much mind.
Yeah, right.
And we have a Bigfoot, we have a Christian angel, we have the Mothman, there is a classic gray alien, and there's even a lizard person in a suit. So I try to play all sides here intentionally to get to a sort of a 10,000-foot blurred eye truth. Another way I tried to do that was to ensure that someone on the far left and someone on the far right could probably each get something out of this book.
I think so.
This is not a quote-unquote red-pilled book. It's a pilling book. I'm hoping to deliver truths. But my point is not to be lockstep with a certain ideology here. I'm really shooting for a capital T truth, at least insofar as I understand it. Right,
and the targets of the book are very multifaceted, just various, a variety of targets. I mean, I'm just flipping through now. Don't want to spoil too much of the book, but to give people a sense, you take on recycling, everything from recycling to the abolition of boredom. I'm looking at the disruptors page. It's not like when you're talking about disruptors, you're just taking aim at one like lefty Silicon Valley. You got Jordan Peterson here, and
Marie Kondo.
just a variety of people, sort of and Steve Jobs, of course. Just aiming for a capital T truth. Taking down people from very different realms of the culture in equal measure.
And that's the beautiful thing about your comics, in that you're delivering, these truths, but yet if we were reading this as a blog post, it would be very, not the writing itself, but the sentiments, people would be more apt to take certain sides, but the memetics and the Jungian placement of your archetypal imagery, which I'm sure you're very, versed in regards to where to place things and how the human eye, he's talking and you put him over on this side, it's awesome.
Well, thank you.
So it feels good.
Some of that is intuitive. Some of that comes from the literature and things I've read, like Jung, etc. But some of it is just being a cartoonist and blocking and thinking like a film director.
Yeah.
So in some cases that intrinsic value that comes from placement of characters or placement of furniture or items in the frame. That's where the alchemy actually happens, because I may not intend all of these things to unfold the way they do, but given just enough thought, the dominoes fall in the right way.
And not to presume, but I bet you like the film A Scanner Darkly.
I love Scanner Darkly.
I know, I could maybe, presumably, I was like, he must like Scanner Darkly because it's so good, and it reminds me of your work a lot.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Linklater is another. I feel like it's like a certain artistic Texas vibe. I don't know. That sounds really cringe way of describing it.
No, that's
it's like
that's totally apt. So Linklater is special to me, mostly because of the film Slacker. A little bit older. That was like my intro to him, and it blew my mind. I love Scanner Darkly. I even like his arguably most cringe film, which is Waking Life, which is just a barrage of philosophical tidbits over and over and over, and there's no real plot, and it's all a dream or whatever. Just kind of a terrible movie, but I even like that.
But it's kind of, I can see why it would be up your alley.
Yeah,
because it is animated, right?
Animated, it's like rotoscoped over with traced animation.
You could almost make a similar movie out of How Did We Get Here? You know what I mean? At least a scene, right?
Totally.
That'd be
very
awesome.
Cool.
And being from from Dumas and then moving to San Angelo, my dad was in the military, and he's a clerk now, and my mother stays at home. So in a way, that helped define who I am. But for you, what is your background like? Did you witness these things as a young person, and then you came to later, 30 years later, read Fang Numina, or were you always into reading about philosophy in your life, or were your parents philosophically minded?
Not really.
Friends?
So my mom is a sort of a seeker type, lefty, very sweet woman, very interested in, for a while she was a Buddhist when I was a kid. She went to various churches. Her family was a part of a this like mid-century northern Texas like radio Baptist church. So like there's this weird technological element to their church because it was broadcast over the radio. And my father's side of the family is quietly Protestant. So religion was not really a thing growing up because they kind of disagreed. So they were like, oh, well, let the kids figure it out. So like,
same here.
I'm not particularly religious. I identify as like believing in God. I'm not like particularly like practicing. I don't attend a church. So like I come from that like late lefty kind of humanist milieu, which I have trained myself out of essentially. But I am simply interested in being an autodidact. Like I went to college 2 years. I hold no degree. I dropped out. I went to a couple community colleges. And then I just decided to start reading books one at a time. And that has served me far better.
Yep. That's what people say, that's what people tell me.
I didn't go to school either, and I fancy myself as one as well. And it's really fun, and you can just go off into anything that you feel you're ready, and you finish the book, and you take what you got from it, even if you didn't finish it sometimes.
Leave the hindmost. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I have an interesting relationship with that too. Like my father is a professor of philosophy, like very academic background, and I did go to college. I graduated, but like, there's a part of me that always wondered if I should have gone back, gotten the PhD, my dad.
Right.
And maybe that still would have been a good vocation for me, but I like to think of myself more as an autodidact now, and I think there's a lot of advantages to that. Obviously, with how much education costs, I mean, you probably could have almost done a whole thing in How Did We Get Here about education. There's probably you probably could have
There's
written,
a part 2, it's going in.
Yeah, I mean, you could have written volumes and volumes, honestly, of different takedowns. These I gather a lot of the ones in How Did We Get Here are just kind of the most personally pertinent, was the feeling I got.
Well, like I said, I was very antagonistic toward the capital A art world, so it all started with
the piece we have open now.
The piece we have open now, the art world.
Bring up,
that was the nugget. That was the reason I knew it could not be an art book, and the reason it is a comic.
Yeah.
And the reason I make comics now. I've absolutely fallen in love with this format. It is, like you said, it's half writing, which I'm not much of a writer, but I've read enough. I understand how stories move. I understand how narratives progress. Yeah. And I think I'm getting better.
No, it's good, yeah.
Illustration and cartooning is vastly different. It's not just drawing, some singer's face on a t-shirt and putting some lovely text in there or anything. You're blocking scenes. You become a like filmic director.
Yeah.
And that is a different skill set that I am still learning on the fly, but I think I'm getting better at. So in middle age, seeing myself get better on 2 separate creative fronts that dovetail into one another has been really powerful.
No, it's really, really very cool. Yeah. I was gonna ask something about Art World. It's on my mind. Give me a sec.
Quick, while you think of that, have you seen that movie Chainsaw Buzzkill or Buzzkill Chainsaw?
No.
It's literally about the art world.
Oh.
It's on Netflix.
Oh, no, I have seen this. It's great.
Yeah, it was like the same vibe. Buzzsaw.
Yeah. I enjoyed it.
It was fun.
I enjoyed it.
What I don't know, I haven't seen that. Maybe I should. Maybe it ties into what I'm going to say. I think one thing, and I'm sure you probably agree with this on some level, one thing I find really sad is a lot of people, you highlight a lot of the sort of bullshit of the art world and the way things are for profit, and the way art just becomes totally commodified, and the way, I mean, to a lesser extent, but still present, like just kind of the silliness also of a lot of, abstract and figurative art. I think a lot of like a sort of normie audience would agree that like a lot of that, the art world is silly, kind of similar with the fashion world. The normie response is like, yeah, that stuff is bullshit. And what's kind of sad is like they're right up to a point. Like your criticisms here, I actually think are what most people think. But what's sad is a lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater and then just assume all art is pretentious. Right. So that's one of the real tragedies. It's taken art further from the common man and made it more of this elite thing by packaging the good aspects of art and layers of bullshit. Now, one can be an autodidact and get around it. I'm not saying it's that pessimistic.
No, you're actually correct. Yeah. I think I have kind of 2 ideas about this. One, bell curve meme.
Yeah. I mean,
the guy on the far left, art's retarded. Guy on the far right, art's retarded. They're both right. But the other idea I have here is that going back to the idea of the end of history and infantilism, I have seen the art experience, the capital A art experience, the gallery, museum experience change so dramatically, especially over the last 10 years, where by any controversy is snuffed out for the safety of the viewer.
Oh yeah, well that's an even
there are Philip Guston paintings that depict Ku Klux Klan members that are housed in museums with a black slider bar and a warning on them. So you have to understand that you may see a Klansman when you remove this sheath. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So if that is the state of where we're at, I'm in hard agreement with the normie that thinks art is retarded.
Yeah.
Because it has become absolutely flattened in the service of safety.
Definitely. Yeah. Again, the safetyism as a critical driver of a lot of very negative developments. I also wanted to, we talked a little bit about Nick Land, how this book isn't like a red pill book per se. But I am curious, how you came across, I guess, Nick Land. You don't reference like Bronze Age pervert in here or anything, but like he is, and I don't know if you let me know if there's anyone you don't want to bring up because they're controversial. But I feel like increasingly, it's as we talked about earlier, with every year that passes, more and more of this stuff is totally normal and actually okay to kind of bring up as like something that's part of your.
I'm absolutely fine with it. I try to read the widest swath of things I can, whether that means intentionally seeking things that are quote-unquote controversial or reading classics simply because they're not read. I try to be as widely read as possible. There are no pretensions toward the Longhouse or Unlived Space or any like the Bronze Age pervert ideas here because I hadn't read them. Would they be here if not? Maybe it'd be a slightly different book. I don't know. But yeah, I enjoy that stuff. I enjoy transgressive literature for its own sake. Yeah. I don't think I'm an edgelord. There's nothing edgy per se in my output. But I really do try to read the widest swath of experience I can and allow that to inform my work as best it can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one can't help but think when reading this that like a lot of what you describe is the issues, what Bronze Age pervert and what other dissident right people call like the Bugman. Right. But also, look, Bugman is just kind of more or less a play on.
But.
It's right on the front.
It is referenced. I do.
I think I had noticed that. Yeah. So you do reference it, but even that's kind of a play on the Nietzsche idea of the last man.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are hardly ideas that any one political camp has a monopoly on.
Agreed.
But,
agreed. Yeah, and I really try to bring in as wide an audience as I can without allowing for poisonous ideas.
Yeah.
For sure.
And what that means is I have no intention of being the next Mike Ma for comics. I have no intention of trying to write a barbarian saga about conquering the West. I can only speak to what interests me at the moment and what really upsets me generally.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
More cultural critique than Julius Evola or Spangler.
Right, and it's just, as you said, it's oftentimes the best inspirations aren't from these highfalutin intellectual ideas, but rather something that you really feel on a gut level, things that piss you off.
Intuition is very real.
Yeah, no, definitely. I did want to talk a little bit about one thing I liked that you highlighted in a different interview was how you listen to a lot of podcasts while you work.
Oh, totally.
I was curious if you still did that, and I also, it's less a question, more of a comment. It's easy to imagine how you would develop, the wide variety of different types of thinkers like Nick Land, like Bap, like, any number of people who kind of, and these, writers like Welbeck, who you cite in the work we discussed earlier. It's easy to imagine how you can come across these through the medium of podcasting, because podcasting, I really think, so much is one of the key open grounds for new ideas.
Absolutely.
These days, yeah.
I mean, what is it? It's people in your head talking about ideas.
Yeah.
Generally, those ideas come from source material. And the people in your head talking about these ideas, if they're worth their salt, will show their sources. This is something I've always been interested in. When I was young and I was less inspired by philosophy or literature, I would go back and meticulously research the lineage of a band, who were their inspirations, who were their inspirations, and that comes from like a punk rock idea of like credibility or authenticity or whatever that's worth. Until you're all the way back to some like nascent blues man or whatever. Yeah. So that idea, it's the same thing. It's just for larger concepts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure podcasting and having these voices in my head constantly certainly feeds that. Same thing occurs in books quite a bit.
Right.
You'll read that X was influenced by Y, so you go buy those books, etc. But yeah, I'm interested in archiving ideas and the source of said ideas.
Yeah, no, very much. Do you still listen to a lot of podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I've definitely since the time I wrote this, I was probably listening to really dissident political podcasts. I'm sure that probably is illustrated in the book. Far less so now. I like listening to chill casts where it's guys talking about a movie and I'll go on the occasional podcast and do that. And I really enjoy long form dives into current creators, which is something you guys are really great at, as well as Art of Darkness.
Yeah,
I know you guys have worked with those guys a couple times. That's kind of the zone I'm more interested in. It's just
Art of Darkness is great,
lineage of creativity. Kind of goes back to what I was talking to a second ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my podcasting started with New Right, and now other kind of solo podcasts. I do I started off very much interested in intellectual, ideological.
Totally.
I started out with something to say kind of thing.
Totally.
I still have something to say, but increasingly I kind of stuff that's more focused on the creative and artistic aspects, like Art of Darkness. Is a great example. Really respect what those guys do. They do longer podcasts than me. They do,
they go hard,
voluminous research. But are you familiar with Art of Darkness? You maybe
no.
Yeah, you should check them out. They're cool.
One day.
Anyhow, this is kind of a silly question, but I'll throw it out there. Do you think podcasting can be an art, or do you think of it? I don't know, because people go back and forth on this. I think, again, podcasts like Perfume Nationalist and Red Scare, to a certain extent, even kind of ushered in an era where people get really sort of aesthetic about the way they present their podcast and the lifestyle, but maybe some of it's silly. I don't know. I'm just curious if you had a thought on if it can really be an art, because I have mixed views on that.
But I have mixed views on it as well. Just as a listener, as an atomized singular person, I look at it for sources of inspiration. I look at it as sources of new voices in writing, literature, etc. So in that regard, I look at it pretty singularly as artifice, not art. It's good for an end for me. Now that said, I didn't plan on talking about this, but I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Ghost Jail.
Heard of it.
Okay, they're kind of an Birdo. It's kind of an esoteric audio ephemera, generally about a certain idea.
Yeah.
But they just released, I think, a 3-hour radio play.
Yes.
And it's kind of a hell house, it's this crazy warning about death and what it could mean, and involves some kind of techno pessimism, Nicklandian ideas and stuff, kind of how did we get here, frankly. Yeah. I would say that approach is art.
Definitely. I mean, I think you also know Brendan Lusso.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Tales from the Mall.
Fantastic.
Tales from the Mall is great, but also he did a long radio play.
Did the Isolation Chamber.
The Isolation Chamber. I feel like that's...
I would say that's around the cultural space as Ghost Jail. I think it exists. I think it's early days. It's kind of nascent.
So it's new radio drama.
It's new radio. It's just radio drama, and that's not anything new. But maybe because it's a podcast and you can plug it into your little pocket computer, it has a bigger reach. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh, I think potentially. Yeah. I mean, I think we're in the nascent stages of a lot of this. What Jack from TPN always talks about is the idea of the podcast is like an ongoing soap opera.
Right.
Which they do feel that, especially his Red Scare to an extent that you kind of grow.
You plug back in.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. I think there's even for non sort of fictional ones, there's that artistic element. But then it's I guess it's more soap opera, which is not what people think of when they think of high art. But a lot of things I think can have that artistic element. But fundamentally, I do as a podcaster, that's how I do. I mean, I do think of it as a creative outlet to be doing stuff like this, but at the same time, it's a little more, what's the word? I don't know. It's a little more like media. It's like the equivalent of writing. It's more like journalism than like writing fiction.
I can definitely
journalism
see
can
that.
be an art too. It's kind of gonzo.
No, I can see that.
These are silly debates in some ways. Like, who cares what is and isn't art? I just thought, as an artist, and as a podcast appreciator, I'd lob it at you. Yeah.
I can't be the arbiter of what is or what is not art as a retired artist. However, I will say it's given me lots of inspiration. A lot of podcasts have truly inspired me, given me new ideas. That's a generative proposition. And I'm far more concerned day to day with what's generative rather than what's artistic.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way of looking at it. I think podcast is highly generative in terms of, for me, I always say, it's almost like something that you wouldn't want to advertise, but I'm kind of an open book about it. Like, it's just a really good way to meet people. Like,
totally.
How do you get interesting people to talk to you? Well, you don't just say, I mean, you can say, I would love to grab coffee or something, but it's much more interesting to be let's do my podcast.
Yeah.
Easier than wearing a sandwich board?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Standing on the street wearing a sandwich board.
Yeah. No. It's a connector of dots. It's highly generative of idea. The art of conversation, so we say, is a big part of it. But anyway.
Have you ever listened to Schizotopia?
I've heard of that.
No, I have heard of it.
It's like this similar vibe where it's like, are the techno-communists listening to Deleuze? Or it's like that kind of, where they just like say a bunch of crazy
some theory
words.
Gobbledygook.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, so that's just the
I'm kind of getting
thing of ideas. Yeah. Anyway,
interesting. Well, we touched on the idea of, kind of comics as memes earlier,
sure.
But maybe we could delve a little bit more into that. I mean,
Great.
Again, we did meet at Meme Analysis as an event. How did you come across Chris's work? I mean, was it through Aeonic Comics, or did you kind of...
No, I followed Chris somehow. I think this is quite some time ago at this point. I'm not sure he was even doing like memes proper. I think he was doing simple man-to-camera stuff.
Yeah, YouTube.
About the future, about ideas on YouTube. And I think I just reached out to him, was like some specific video essay he'd done. I think I got a kick out of, and just cold emailed the guy, and he was like, great. And then he was in town before he lived in Los Angeles, and we went out to a bar one night and hung out, and kind of like late pandemic-ish. Yeah.
Interesting.
And we've just kind of been friendly ever since.
Yeah, very cool. Do you have many thoughts on memes as like
sure.
in the way it relates to your work? I know that's another abstract one. I just Meme Analysis talks about, other people talk about it too, memes as this, I mean, not to keep revolving the conversation, is X and Y and Z art, but like, what do you think of memes as like a modern form of art, and their power and their danger, perhaps?
And their archetypal significance.
Yeah, no, this is a great question, because as someone who has for 20 plus years made painstaking, detailed, careful images with their hands, the advent of meme culture came initially as an absolute shock. Yeah. I'm sure it's how a lot of people feel about AI currently. It's the way I felt about memes in, let's say, 2010, 2009, whatever. I realized there was now an immediacy with image making and image and text combinations that preceded and sort of built a new language. And this has directly influenced the way I have made work. It led me to try to be more efficient, to try to cut down on time. And these are all like late capitalist kind of like weird things that you probably shouldn't think about when you're making art. But when it's tied to money and you got to pay rent, these things are concerns.
Yeah.
So that's how it began for me. Later, I realized what I was doing was divorced from this very like quick, fast-paced ideology, and that being slow, there's a phrase when you're using a firearm, it's that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And instead of trying to keep a pace with mimetic imagery, I decided, let me take that one image, parse it apart across a comic, make many panels, extrapolate the idea. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I end up with a further polished, better realized product by not trying to keep a pace with mimetics. Now, that all said, that's how it's affected my practice.
Yeah.
But that all said, it's a brand new language. It's a I don't know, Cthulhuid techno-capital language all its own that we can reference. And like language, I brought up the bell curve meme. You both knew exactly what I was talking about.
Exactly.
This is a linguistic,
huge idea.
linguistic visuo whatever connection.
Yeah.
A shorthand for communication, and in that, it's incredibly powerful. Seeing what memes have done, and meme culture, and the memeplex or whatever you want to call it, have done to like things like stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
Like I used to be really into stand-up, and like. Nothing hits harder than a hilarious oblique meme to me.
Yeah.
I saw Nick Mullen last year. It was great. I had a blast.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, was it as funny as like the last 5 memes that I saw that like really blew me away? I don't know.
Yeah.
No diss to that guy. It's a different format. But it's rewiring our brains for communication. So, I know a lot of people who just discount their import, and I think that's absolutely foolish.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I'm sure these are even kind of old ideas in 2020.
No, but I think it's important to unpack them. And I liked especially what you said, because sort of the relationship with memes in your work. You're not making memes, but I think, like, as you said, it's like in comics in particular, which, has the formal similarity to memes and it being pictures and words.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can unpack them further.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's more. I've never really made a meme. I'm not. I mean, we're all into meme culture, as you said. They're hilarious. They're a part of our lives, but. I'm a little bit more like I like to unplug and like sit down with a book or a comic book. So I think there's still a place for that freeze of the chaos of the internet kind of presents things in an overstimulating, chaotic way, which can be really fun. But I think
the other thing
taking that was good. Yeah,
is to crystallize. There is a strong power in postmodernity in 2023 in the land of memes.
Yeah,
in crystallizing narrative.
Yeah.
In telling a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, you are taking someone outside of the non-narrativized endless scroll and putting them back into human time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your story could be terrible, and you're still doing that.
Yeah.
And that's an arresting power in the land of the scroll.
Yeah. And you mean the land of like the physical book?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. No, definitely. Bringing the conversation back to physical media, but it is important to unplug and be able to hold.
And before we move on to the physical media, I'd just like to talk about kind of the mythological notion of the hypothesis, by Chris, that like, for example, the mythological connection between, for example, like Apollo or Wojak being like Apollo and Pepe. Sorry to spit. And Pepe is like.
The Dionysian.
Is Dionysus.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there's weight to that sentiment at all, or do you kind of? I personally see the connection.
Oh, I certainly see the connection. Yeah. I truck
weird.
with that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially since you have to take Pepe as a whole. You have to see what happened to that character. It was created by a cartoonist named Matt Fury.
Yeah.
And that guy's an avowed lefty, man. That's a sweetheart, peace sign, loving like Bay Area dude. Mm-hmm. And to see what happened to his figure taken from him illustrates a certain Dionysian like ascendancy, because he has no control. He'll never get it back.
Yeah,
he's made videos where he dies, and he's made videos where he goes through karmic cycles and stuff, and it's never going to catch, man. That the people own that. The culture, for whatever it's worth, own that now. And in that, I mean, the last time I saw something like that was like the Bob Dobbs figure from the Church of the Subgenius.
Oh yeah, you're a Subgenius fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very much a fan.
And that entire visual not to get sidetracked, but their entire visual language is cartooning based, it's comic based.
Another Texas original.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. But these figures that get wrenched from their creators. Mickey Mouse is another. There's several.
Yeah,
but
seems like Disney's reined Mickey back in a little bit.
If anyone can take back their figure, it's Disney.
Interesting test case of a corporation that was powerful enough to do it.
Totally. But you'll never escape the like Seditionaries shirt, the old punk shirts like Mickey hanging himself. Those still exist. So once something escapes velocity like that, I think it only strengthens the point.
Of course. Okay. Very interesting. So we want to talk about physical media.
Oh no, it was more just bring it back to an earlier stage in the conversation. You highlighted the importance of physical media, but I think we've probably beat that beat that horse a bit.
So your next book's coming out before Christmas.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have it ready for Christmas.
Awesome.
It's called Self-Licking Ice Cream Cone. Hoping to self-publish it. Just a regular comic. 8 shorts, some parapolitical, some autofiction, and a weird, call it a soft-boiled crime drama.
Gotcha.
Right on.
Very cool. Are you going to work with or I don't know. I'm sure you'll get another, because How Do We Get Here is blurred by Apocalypse Confidential. It seems like those guys are very much on your wavelength, or you're on theirs.
I just did a header illustration for Apocalypse Confidential's most recent special presentation, which is called, I believe, John Ford and Dust. John Ford and, oh my God, they're going to kill me. I can't remember it. But
they're great.
It's a special presentation about kind of 1950s proto-futurist Las Vegas vibe.
Yeah. No, there's
Very
such a
cool.
good example of a group of guys who kind of came out of the political side of Twitter and made something that's completely, I mean, I guess, it's obviously not completely non-political, but like it's it's similar to what you're doing. It's very, it's founded.
I consider them a kindred spirit because there are ideas that we both cling to, that we would like to see represented in art, that we both feel are underrepresented in art. I wouldn't speak for them, but that's what I see in their work. And I enjoy working with sort of fellow traveler, kindred spirits on that regard, because it's not always what you can do to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So if I can work with publishers like them, another great example is the publisher of How Did We Get Here? First to Knock, run by the great Michael Daly. Working with them on a possible new project still in the early
Do they publish
days.
mostly as comics or other...
No,
or not at all. Yeah.
Not at all. I'm one of 2 cartoonists that they publish. They do translations of lost French classics.
Oh wow!
Very
different.
Very different.
Yeah.
This is why I'm very happy to be involved with them, because the ideas are what allows me entree into a publisher like this, which I'm very happy about. They have a great horror anthology that my girlfriend has a short in about nature horror.
Yeah.
They do. They've republished and translated Wismont. Quite a bit of really interesting, sort of highly intellectual stuff. Michael Daly, the publisher, also wrote a long form, very interesting biography. It was the first one to be published by them, called Bobby Blue Jacket, about a Tulsa, Oklahoma native man in the 50s who became a bit of a crime boss.
Gotcha. Oh, interesting.
Thoroughly interesting, kind of all over the map. A lot like Apocalypse Confidential, they have a pretty succinct point of view that they're interested in getting out into the world. So it's kind of the people I like working with the most at the moment.
Definitely. We have the punk documentaries page in How Did We Get Here open, and I'm kind of thinking about this with regard to talking about Apocalypse Confidential, and other sort of small publishers, and obviously this podcast is kind of part of the subculture of this part of Twitter, or whatever you want to call it. I'm curious if you had any general thoughts. You highlight in this punk documentaries section how once vital subcultures get sort of commodified, beaten to death, and stripped of all meaning, which maybe that's part and parcel of what we were talking about earlier with the general nostalgia overload of things. But do you kind of view what's going on online and sort of in these intersecting spheres that we're a part of as it's almost a tired topic, but as kind of a new and vital subculture, and if so, how do we avoid the fate of the punk documentary? Or maybe that's not even an issue we have yet. But
I don't think we're there yet.
No, definitely not. And maybe never will be.
And maybe never will be.
Yeah.
But I will say this: stop naming things. That'll help.
Yeah.
Stop giving stuff titles and names.
So maybe I shouldn't even ask the question, right?
No. It's fair. And I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to
I get what you're saying.
Sort of the ideaplex at large. Keep things gray. Keep things small. And speaking of certain ideologues within this sphere, Curtis Yarvin talks a lot about waiting until the time is right to make a sort of move for a political shift. Now, I'm not into politics necessarily, but I think that idea rings true.
Yeah.
Wait till you have a head of steam and then figure out what you're going to do before you just get co-opted or shut down.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Good advice.
Speaking of punk documentaries, have you seen Decline of Western Civilization?
Oh, sure.
That's
the original punk
That's
documentary.
a good punk documentary.
That's a great. You know what? Again, I have a Black Flag tattoo. I have a number of awful stick and poke punk tattoos from 15, 20 years ago, and I identified as a punk rocker when I was young, and whatever.
That's what makes it sad to see.
So it makes it sad.
Things, yeah.
But that's I really relish in the idea of skewering my own heroes, especially subcultural heroes from youth, because in seeing them be co-opted, there's a lesson there, and time is a flat circle, and it'll happen again and again and again, and maybe we can just avoid the hero worship next time before it gets there.
Yeah, no. That flavor kind of, I think, exists throughout your work and throughout How Did We Get Here in terms of being willing to be critical of your childhood and adolescent heroes. I think it's important, and it's kind of an antidote to, maybe that's one small antidote to the endless stream of nostalgia, is to be like, well, no, it's not exact, to avoid the hero worship, which becomes totally tired.
Yeah, I mean, one thing attendant with safetyism is like hagiography of someone who's not relevant now. As long as the CIA did something evil 20 years ago, we can talk about it, but not today. Yeah. As long as someone was in a great movie 20 years ago, you can worship them. But if they're still making movies, it's a little bit off limits.
Yeah, I mean, now people are critical of someone like William Burroughs to some extent now, but he kind of has gone through that hagiography.
Absolutely.
Definitely, maybe Burroughs, people know Burroughs had some edgy stuff, but like Ginsberg, maybe even a better example, where he is sort of beatified as this countercultural figure. It's like, if this person was actually still alive today and maybe they'd be sort of a corporate sellout now, but if they were
canceled.
still, or canceled, and as probably either of those men by modern standards would be. But again, it's a really interesting point you're making, that things get total, it's this way that, not to sound too lefty anti-capitalist, but it's, I think, a way that the sort of corporate system of powers that be, part of their controlled opposition is uplifting heroes that seem to represent some kind of rebellious spirit,
and can't speak for themselves.
But can't speak for themselves because they're dead. Maybe in certain cases they genuinely did sort of sell out later in life, but maybe it's simply because they can't speak for themselves. That seems to be a big part of, like, you can be rebellious by buying this black and white coffee table book of William S. Burroughs photos from your whatever store to put on your IKEA coffee table.
Perhaps one of the greatest examples being like maybe Kurt Cobain.
Oh,
fantastic
example!
Fantastic
sad.
example.
Yeah.
I mean, Kurt Cobain would be doing Target ads with his grandkid.
I saw a meme like that. It was like, would Kurt Cobain be a vax-maxed,
100%.
today, or would he be the opposite? And
he'd have the vacuum form thing on his face. Sometimes picture him in a plane with the
wear your mask, guys.
Crazy mask. Yeah, it's just a mask. Yeah, he wears the shirt mask up.
Fuck drum.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, no, definitely. But speaking of figures, one thing were you going to say something?
I just said rip.
Yeah, definitely. Want to talk a little more squarely about literature for a sec. You did on the show I did for New Right with J.L. Mackie. We talked about Harry Crews, and I mentioned a book. It was totally like this random. Sometimes you're doing a podcast, you try to go by the outline, and sometimes you get a random thought. And for me, I haven't read a lot of Harry Crews, but I remembered Florida Frenzy, which I think is a fantastic name for a book. And I brought it up. JL wasn't as familiar, but you DM'd me after that. Indeed, Florida Frenzy exists as a book. Perhaps
it's
even
real.
in this room.
It's a mere 2-3 feet away.
Yeah. There you go. It's a collection of essays.
Section.
Yeah,
and Blood Meridian too up there.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. So anyway, want to talk a little bit about Harry Crews.
Yeah.
Not that I still haven't read enough or any really Harry Crews, but he's a Southern writer. Texas isn't exactly the American South, but it's related.
Well, he's a Georgian guy.
He's a Georgian. Yeah. Oh yeah, right.
Harry Crews is a definite favorite of mine. Top 5 easy. To say that he's a Southern Gothic writer is both accurate and completely inaccurate.
Yeah.
He is obsessed with the body, with freaks, with deformities, with body modification, scarification, bodybuilding, boxing. Jeet Kune Do, karate, etc. He is a writer of physicality, and he's very visceral in his language. He's very curt in his manner in life. He is pretty near and dear to me as far as a creative star, though I don't think I make anything necessarily related. He's a deep inspiration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we talked a little bit about that with JL as well, how like he is totally like the Southern Gothic writer, but then so much more.
Yeah.
I think of him, again, not having read too much of him. I watched a documentary that featured him. I know a bit about him, but it's a shame I haven't read more. But I think of him as a little bit of a Burroughs-esque figure in certain ways too, and just being a very particular, a man with extremely particular interests and passions that he pursued, at the expense of anyone, obviously very much transgressing against the boundaries of polite society.
Yeah. If anyone's ever interested, I recommend A Feast of Snakes, as well as a shorter story called The Gypsy's Curse.
Yeah, I've heard people have told me to read Gypsy's Curse before.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, these are just short stories. I should read them sooner than later. But, I want to talk about your literary sort of inspirations in general. We talked about Welbeck earlier, and I believe I think I saw you tweeting about Cormac McCarthy too. And
Cormac McCarthy's also a major sort of literary figure of mine. I reread Blood Meridian this year. It'd been many years. Suttree, fantastic. Yeah. I also had never read Child of God.
I still haven't read that myself.
I read that earlier this year. It was quite good.
Did you read his new book?
I did both. Stella Maris and
Pretty Horses, or no, that's the older one.
It's right there.
It's like the Stagecoach or something.
Jeez, hang on, sorry, we're in a library. I can literally.
Yeah.
Stella Maris and The Passenger.
It's the beauty of doing these in-person podcasts.
Yeah.
You bring in the
and it goes the other way. It's The Passenger followed by Stella Maris. Fantastic. I really enjoyed it. In certain circles, I think Cormac McCarthy's a little bit looked down on. He's like a science respecter guy. Big science. He worked at in Albuquerque at the university there, or Santa Fe rather. Sorry, at the university. He had an office in the science department, and what he would do is just rap about science with scientists all day. So this is one of his most sciencey books.
Oh, interesting.
You could read him as a very religious Christian man, and you could also read him as a very scientistic individual. In a way, that's what these books are about, is the interplay between those things. There are some vague supernatural elements. It follows a very small cast, a brother and a sister mostly. Passengers mostly about the brother. Stella Maris mostly about the sister. I think some people are upset that they're his last books because they're a bit of a departure from form. They're set in the 1980s, and I think Louisiana, if I remember correctly. They're not cowboy novels. They're not steeped in that kind of plains despair of North Texas. But I thoroughly enjoy them, and I think I reread them both within a year. I think they're great.
Yeah. No, I stopped to read those last two, but I want to.
What are you reading right now?
So I just finished Caleb Caudell's The Neighbor.
Yes.
Fantastic.
You were a guest, yes.
I was so impressed with that book and the pacing and the way it moved forward.
That's his debut novel. He just released a collection of short stories.
I have to get it.
Yeah, I actually haven't read it either.
I'm a fan.
He's
good stuff. I just finished that last night. That's top of mind right now. I got a stack over there. I got reading Larry McMurtry, Dashiell Hammett. And I got this great book about sort of historical theory book called Albion's Seed. You familiar with this book?
No.
Historical theory.
Yeah, it's kind of this theory that America and its folkways all come from 4 strains of English Protestantism.
Huh.
Interesting.
Broken down amongst like kind of a class breakdown across like 4 strata, and where they ended up and how they influenced Quakerism or polite folkways or whatever. Just cracked that. That seems pretty interesting.
Definitely.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's in Pertinence, there's that Mitch Horowitz book, like Occult America, in which he talks about. It's pretty similar that, for example, stuff like a dowsing rod, American folk occult stuff.
I'd love to read that. It sounds great.
Manly P. Hall also writes, The Secret Doctrine of America.
Exactly.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, I think this is just like a ethnography, but in that same vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about that stuff as well. Yeah. Welbeck, did you kind of get into Welbeck by the latest like Red Scare craze over Welbeck, or are you a longer time fan?
I got into, when did I start reading Welbeck? It must have been related to that or something. I mean, I've never been.
He's having a moment, definitely.
He's having a
America
moment.
Now.
I've never been like a major obsessive Red Scare listener. But,
no, me neither. But they seep into everything.
It seeps into everything. Yeah. They're truly a cultural force. I think the first Welbeck I read was The Map and the Territory.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. For sure.
So amazing. And coming from like an art background and, falling out of love with art in a way, that was a really powerful
because the artist in that does something that could be pilloried, perhaps.
In a way, sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the worst thing,
no,
but he does like Google Maps type
He
art,
builds
right?
maps, yes.
Yeah. Not far from the worst example, but still a little bit like what the fuck,
But quite a few Welbeck books up there. Another guy I like, who I'm not sure people on this side of things are like really hip to, is this guy named Carson Mell. Love this guy. Carson Mell he's like a television writer. He wrote for a number of TV shows, and I think he still does. And he's had a couple feature movies, but his books are incredible. He writes about this fictional country western outlaw singer named Bobby Bird, and just his exploits.
I think I've heard of this.
It's very humorous, very short.
The screenwriting thing is kind of interesting because one thing I was kind of sort of half comment on earlier is the similarity between screenwriting and writing comics. I mean, it's kind of a similar art.
I literally write a script before I put pen to paper.
Yeah, which is the norm.
It's the
which
norm,
I didn't realize until I started working in Hollywood like that. It really is.
I really write it in script format and everything.
Plenty of comic book writers who, and like Final Draft, I don't know if that's the program you use, but like the same programs that people use to write scripts.
Totally, absolutely.
They use for so there's a connection there, and then
also don't forget, before you make a picture, you have to have a storyboard. That's a comic book.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So the two arts are very much intertwined. Then also, even just with like writing novels. I mean, I think that a lot of screenwriters, and they're on strike now. Not even to bring up the strike. You probably don't even have many thoughts on it because you don't work in the industry. But anyway,
less than none.
Exactly. But anyhow, that I don't want to say like obviously people watch a lot of TV and movies, so they appreciate screenwriting. But the way that can teach you, as someone who's worked adjacent to it and also writes novels, the way that can teach you about story structure is really bar none.
Absolutely. The 3-act breakdown.
Absolutely. The whole Cormac McCarthy, wrote. I don't know how many screenplays he actually wrote.
So he wrote the Sunset Limited. Yeah. He wrote The Counselor.
I haven't seen any of these, unfortunately.
And you know what? And there's a third I'm forgetting, but I think he has 3 screenplays under his belt.
Interesting.
That have been produced.
Yeah. And I think this is correct, that No Country for Old Men started as a screenplay.
That's the third. I think that's the third.
That's the third.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, did he write that with the Coen brothers?
Maybe. It might have been The Road movie.
Well, The Road, they made The Road.
That's another Cormac movie.
The Road was a book first, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Totally.
I think he might have started No Country for Old Men as a screenplay.
I think you're right.
Then
I think
pivoted
that
to
is the
making
third.
it into a novel.
I think that is.
And it's cool because like you read No Country for Old Men, then you read Blood Meridian. They're incredibly different stylistically, even though having similar themes, and it's probably because of that. I don't know which Cormac McCarthy I like more, but No Country for Old Men is so, not the word isn't prosaic because that's a negative word, but like it's so easy to read and visualize everything. Whereas Blood Meridian is also like that, but in a much more
Blood Meridian's a bit more oblique.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just I don't know. They're really not a question, more of a comment, just on the, and it's a very Hollywood oriented, LA oriented question in some ways, how these different mediums of storytelling can be very porous to each other in terms of skills. Again,
I was saying I read because I don't want to find inspiration or draw purely inspiration from comic books, but I am I've become really obsessive about movies in middle age, and the screenwriting format and specific genre pictures have become so inspirational to me, like the films of S. Craig Zahler.
Oh, they're so good. Yeah,
just
one of the best people doing it
just
now.
incredible. That and just reading as much as possible, rewatching films like kind of like with a critical eye, not like highfalutin like in a weird way, but just like trying to parse what makes a scene work is really like one-to-one with comic making and
Definitely.
cartooning.
Yeah.
Did you go see Barbie or Oppenheimer?
Neither.
No.
No.
Fair enough. I appreciate, it's not participating in that particular.
It seems so fraught. I figured if whichever one came up on the app first, I would hit later.
I think they're both worth watching.
Okay, yeah.
But I watch a lot of movies, and if you're not as cued into watching a lot of movies, I don't know. Barbie, I don't know. But
there's a movie theater that opened not too far from here that's pretty good about showing like older sort of niche movies, and I recently went and saw To Live and Die in L.A.
I
on a big screen.
just watched
Great.
that.
So good.
Yeah, Friedkin. Yeah,
fantastic.
I
love
adored it. Yeah, I mean, there's so many movies like that that are underappreciated just
Totally.
for their sheer aesthetics, but it's also good storytelling too.
Yeah. No, I had a blast, and seeing it on a big screen was really nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. You had a question about what's the baseball comic, Lachlan?
Oh, Double Ought Kid.
Double Ought, yeah.
Oh, was
you
that
said you had
about what the analogy?
Yeah,
of what
you
it
were
was?
kind of.
Is
If you want to bring that
is
out,
it like an analogy? I mean, my understanding as a metaphor for the story was that it's essentially like underperforming at your job, and that in and of itself is a death sentence to like poverty in a way, because he fails to perform in the game, and then like he gets for the listeners. This is a spoiler.
Quite a dark
spoiler to a 5-page comic book.
But he gets killed basically because
he's executed.
fails. Yeah, and that's kind of how I interpreted it.
Yeah,
it's kind of more macrocosmic.
Yeah,
way
that's not inaccurate. For the listener, I wrote a very short comic called The Double Ought Kid, which was featured in the First to Knock periodical issue number 2, now out of print. But it's essentially about a baseball team who you discover is a prison baseball team. And if you underperform against other local businesses and their, B teams or whatever, the warden will kill you. And the titular character, the Double Ought Kid, is summarily executed at the end of the issue for his poor performance during the night's game. So First to Knock puts out a free periodical, which you can subscribe to completely for free on their website, firsttoKnock.com. And each one is roughly no more than a zine. It'll have contributions by 5 or 6 writers, and sometimes I'll contribute a cartoon or some illustration or whatever. And each one has a secret theme. And it's up to the reader it's kind of a gamified thing to just kind of parse apart what that theme is. And it's already been published. I think they're up to issue 4 at this point, so I think I can safely say that the theme was metrics. And so I wrote a comic that was strictly tied to metrics. And in that case, yes, in my life, living in poverty for many years or close to it, I've definitely come to have a real one-to-one relationship with money, what it means to have it, what it means to not have it. And I think that comes out in the book, and you're not too far off.
Well, no. Good. Well done, because I extrapolated generally what you. I think right on.
Sounds like we got a winner.
So we read obviously. In addition to how did we get here, and we mentioned the Best Served Cold,
right,
and the Double Ought Kid, and the Wishbone
Broken.
Aeonic, Wishbone Broken.
Best Served Cold, that was interesting. Like, it turns out that the guy who's serving the Finns also has a bit of a vendetta against sharks.
Sure.
He was bit by sharks, and then he's like, we'll keep him up anyway on the wall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that one's a little bit about... it's very flat and silly to say looking back, but it is tied to ideas of cancellation, tied to ideas of separating the art from the artist, which is even verbally said at the end of that one.
Yeah, right. That's like the last panel. And then, of course, the Kali Yuga Law comic we mentioned earlier as well. I did comment, like, how do we get here kind of goes for a more intellectual tract.
Yes.
But I noticed kind of a through line in the other comics of yours that I read. It's a very particular brand of dark humor that you have that, I don't know, my critical vocabulary is sort of failing me here, but it hinges on like just the fusion of like day-to-day things with like very totally unexpected sort of, it's probably very Texas, very like Western sense of humor. Very Modest Mouse, even to bring that around.
I can see that.
People real, a surprisingly dark and very humorous twist in every comic. Is what I found.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That does. I'm glad that comes across. That's something that was imbued when I was very young. I used to, you're a kid, you're being annoying in the grocery store.
Yeah.
You have a soda in your hand. You're like, Mom, I want the fucking thing or whatever it is. My mother used to like pointedly grab me by the shoulders and say, well. And she'd hold her palms up and she'd say, you can wish in one hand and you can shit in the other and you can see which one fills up faster.
Yeah.
So that kind of idea is something that I've carried with me since childhood.
Definitely.
A sort of a dry, fatalistic humor is certainly in there somewhere.
Yeah. Even in How Did We Get Here? But again, that branches off into bigger sort of Dicklandian territory. But still, the humor is... it's distinct. It's a through line.
I think if there's something I'm not necessarily consciously doing, but hoping, discovering as I make more and more things, it's that the sort of direct Adam Courtesy, this is what's wrong, here's how you fix it kind of idea, and that humor are finding a sort of a third position in like genre work, like crime.
Yeah.
I like... Best Served Cold alludes to that a little bit. Double Ought Kid alludes to that a little bit. And I have 8 stories that I think about 6 of them fall pretty close to this. And there's a stew that's beginning to happen. It's becoming more narrativized, and I'm not really in control. I'm just kind of watching what's happening.
Gotcha. Interesting. Totally random out there. I mean, we'll wrap up pretty soon, but another quick soundbite to grab. You've also done work on skateboard decks, and you're kind of a former skater, and you even describe that as like one of the things that you're attracted to in Los Angeles. You just want to talk about skating culture and that influence on you a little bit.
Well, that's huge. That's so large. As it's so big for me, I may not even understand it particularly well. But what I do understand is this: when you grow up outside all of the time before the internet. And interact with quotidian architecture as play objects, something happens in your mind that changes it irrevocably. A set of stairs or a curb can be the source of hours, if not days, of not only play, but meditation and generative experience where you hone a craft. Doing that for hours on end is the only reason I can now sit for hours on end after the workday is over and make comics. It's tedious work. It's very slow. I can do about a page a week. It's very slow. And that I really credit that with the reason I can still in middle age afford that much focus to something. Creative. So there's that side of it. There's also the cultural side of it, whereby being a skateboarder in the 1990s still meant slight, not total, but slight cultural ostracization. Which maybe echoes some of our side of Twitter these days. Maybe that's why I'm attracted to it in that regard. Or at least why I found kindred spirits in that regard. Skateboarding has sort of like morphed and turned into another thing, and that's fine. That's none of my business. I'm too old. I have arthritis. But I was lucky enough to work in the skateboard industry for about 5 years. I worked for a lot of big name skateboard brands, very popular brands in the early 2000s. Freelance. I was really lucky. I partnered with a company. I have a shoe with my name on it. You can find it. I have a board with my name on it, as though I were some pro skateboarder.
That's so cool.
They were just into the art. It's like an artist board, an artist shoe, and a couple other really interesting little avenues. Skateboarding's been really good to me in that regard, and I was able to like work within a subculture that was really near and dear to me in childhood. Things happen and you move on, and you have to pay insurance and pay rent, and skateboarding does not pay that well.
Doesn't.
You believe it or not. Unless you're a professional athlete. I'm sure there are still guys out there that are doing absolutely incredible. But as an artist, it's very difficult to make a living. Got to really just want to do it because you love it.
Gotcha. That's super cool. I mean, I was only ever like a poser skater, but I was really into it for like a few minutes as a teenager. And the thing that stays with me about it is the shoes, is the deck designs, is the all of the different like artistic things that sort of go along with it. That's what really inspired me.
I mean, I could really wax on about this, so I'll try to be brief here, but like the waves of visual culture that crashed every 2 to 3 years, where every kid in school come September and the school year would start, would have a completely different outfit.
Yeah.
He was a Rasta this year. He was a goth kid this year.
Yeah.
All because skateboarding's, insatiable need for visual change was so inspirational to me.
Yeah.
Like, it was incredible.
It's like the youth culture. I mean, I'm younger than you, but like the youth culture that I remember was very much driven by that, and I think it's a little different now.
I think it is too. I know it is because of this nostalgia wave that we talk about this afternoon. Skateboarders now, 15-year-old skateboarders now, have the ability to go back and archive footage from the era 1993 to 1998 when I was skateboarding and do pitch perfect fit recreations. The perfectly baggy mil-spec pant. The oversized single stitch Gildan t-shirt with the heavy cartoon print on the chest. I mean, as though they were a looper and stepped out of 1996. The puffy sneakers, which are not even the height of technology for skateboarding anymore, are sought after because of this like resonance with nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see.
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
and to speak, to give credence, and then the one thing before I go on to that. So, for example, that what you're talking about, I think, is best exemplified in Jonah Hill's mid '90s, the film, where it's like a glorification of that shot on film. But then the future being, for example, Tyler the Creator's golf series in regards to an evolution of skateboarding and culture or aesthetic in a way, and that's a great thing.
Totally.
But,
I was never like that was like way past my time, but like I work in apparel, so I have to like vaguely keep up with sort of like aesthetic trends and stuff. That was really interesting what like Pharrell and Tyler the Creator did with like the ice cream brand and then later the golf brand. They were like Mario Brothers-izing like 90s like fashion, whereas like the sneakers had to be even puffier and the pants were even tighter and like the colors were louder. So like at least you know what, I don't shit on any youth trend anymore at all.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it's it's new.
Interesting. Yeah,
like I see a weird kid with like the puffy broccoli hair and like wild like jersey, like a throwback FUBU jersey or whatever. It doesn't make any sense with the rest of his outfit. I'm like, sick, great.
Yeah,
I've never seen
I
that
agree.
done.
I'm always like
good
optimistic
for you,
about kids. And
that's
youth.
sick.
Yeah. It's something vital there.
Yeah, it's awesome. Or if someone like absolutely apes a raver's outfit from like 1993 or something, I'm like, how did you even know how to do that? That's awesome.
No, absolutely. Well, you mentioned your comic comic book to be out by Christmas. Anything else you're working on you want to highlight before we wrap?
Let's see. I'm working on a 4-comic series. I would love to have it published next year. I'm still in some editing phases. It's been the longest writing endeavor of my life. I think when I'm done, it'll be either a very long graphic novel or 4 full-length comics in a series.
Cool. Look for that.
That's been ongoing since like 2020.
Wow.
I'm in the weeds. We'll see. In the meantime, Self-Licking Ice Cream Cone. I am hoping to have out for purchase, delivery by Christmas in a best case scenario. I'm going to be doing it all, everything except for physically hitting print on the machine. And in the meantime, go to firsttoknock.com/howdidwegethere and grab a copy. I know there are copies left, but I know we are dwindling as far as the initial print run is concerned.
Interesting. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear
it.
It
Is good. Yeah. It is. Yeah. Last I checked, I know we are low of stock. So
very cool.
Congratulations.
Get there while you can.
Yeah, get there while you can. Evan, you have anything else? Or? No worries if not. Just
nothing cool.
Fair enough.
All right. I think we can wrap then.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Sterling.
Thank you.
A lot of
Thank you
fun.
very much. It's been great.